Machiavelli wrote the playbook 500 years ago, and the most dangerous person in your office isn't the one working the hardest. It's the one who has already decided you are their stepping stone. The corporate ladder was never designed to reward talent. It was designed to exploit it while rewarding the most dangerous player in the room. You've been told otherwise, and that lie is exactly why someone less talented than you keeps getting promoted. Meritocracy isn't a system. It's a control mechanism. It keeps you compliant, keeps you working harder instead of smarter, and keeps the people at the top comfortable. Machiavelli didn't write a philosophy book. He wrote a survival manual for the court. And the court never disappeared. It just got air conditioning and a Slack channel. 5 weapons, used against you daily. Today you learn them. The same principles that Sun Tzu codified in The Art of War and Robert Greene modernized in the 48 Laws of Power. Walk into any office and tell me what you see. Org charts, job titles, performance reviews, a kitchen with a sign that says your mother doesn't work here, clean up after yourself. The whole infrastructure of fairness, visible, labeled, and utterly decorative. The real org chart isn't on any wall. It's in who gets pulled into certain meetings, who hears about the restructure 3 weeks before the announcement, who gets their budget protected when cuts come, who's described as strategic by the people who actually move pieces around the board. The Renaissance court wasn't run by whoever had the best ideas. It was run by whoever understood the room, who was rising, who was falling, who needed protection, who could be used, and who was about to be replaced without realizing it yet. Sound familiar? The people who rise in modern organizations aren't the hardest workers. They're the most strategically visible. They exist in the minds of decision makers as indispensable, not because they do the most, but because their absence would be felt most acutely. There's a difference. Most people never locate it. Machiavelli's core insight isn't be ruthless, it's simpler and harder than that. Institutions don't reward virtue, they reward perceived indispensability. They reward whoever has made themselves load-bearing in the structure. Every promotion is a zero-sum game, pure game theory in action. When someone gets moved up, someone else didn't. That position didn't multiply, it moved. And the person who moved it wasn't doing it out of goodwill. They were doing it because the promoted person had made a credible case, consciously or not, that they were the structurally necessary choice. That's not a war in the ugly sense, but it is a competition with a single winner per slot, and pretending otherwise just means you enter the arena unarmed. Before you can play the game, you have to see the board. Most people never bother. They keep their heads down and trust that output will carry them. It won't. Output is table stakes. The game is something else entirely, and the first weapon is one nobody teaches you, because it looks like weakness. Weapon 1. Selective Incompetence 245. This is the move that will make HR uncomfortable and make the elite depend on you. Stop trying to be good at everything. The instinct most people follow is maximization. Be reliable across all tasks. Be the one who can handle anything. Cover every base. This feels like security, and it's exactly what makes you replaceable, because it makes you generic. If you're equally competent at everything, you have no leverage anywhere. Selective incompetence is being bad at the small stuff so you have the energy to dominate the big stuff. Let that sink in. This isn't laziness, it's precision, and the discipline it requires is actually higher than the discipline of simply doing everything well, because you have to be able to identify, with precision, what matters and what doesn't, and then you have to resist the instinct to prove yourself in the category that doesn't matter. Caesar didn't manage supply lines. He staged his victories for the Roman public. Every triumph was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to make him the symbol of Roman power, the figure around whom conquest was narrated and glory was attributed. His name was attached to the win. The logistics were handled by people who were very good at logistics and whom nobody has ever made a film about. Caesar understood something most people don't. The value of a task isn't determined by how hard it is. It's determined by whether the people who control your future can see it. The identification process is straightforward. Ask yourself, does this task put me in the room with decision makers, or does it keep me out of that room? Does completing this create a dependency on me, or does it just add my name to a process that could swap me out tomorrow? If a task doesn't touch decision makers, it's low leverage by definition. Now here's the psychological mechanism underneath this. People protect what they feel ownership over. If you gracefully offload the low-leverage work, not by refusing it, but by routing it, delegating it, framing it as a development opportunity for someone else, what happens? The person who picks it up now owns it. They're invested in it. They'll protect it. They'll keep it off your desk. You haven't dumped work, you've created a guardian. But this only functions if the other half is immaculate. The high-leverage tasks you've chosen have to be executed with visible excellence, because selective incompetence, done poorly, just looks like incompetence. You need to be the person in the room who is clearly, demonstrably irreplaceable in the things that move the organization forward. Everything else you treat as noise. Professional visibility alone doesn't protect you. Once you've positioned yourself, you need something else. You need a shield, and that shield is built from something most people throw away without realizing its value. Weapon 2. Information control. 615. The only currency that compounds without being taxed. Think about what that means practically. Money can be redistributed. Authority can be revoked. Titles can disappear overnight in a restructure. But what you know, and more importantly, what only you know, is not easy to take back. Most people share too much. They think transparency builds trust, and they're half right. It builds personal trust while simultaneously eroding structural leverage. There's a version of transparency that makes you likable, and there's a version that makes you ignorable because you've handed over everything you had to bargain with. Machiavelli's warning on this is blunt. The prince who reveals his plans invites their destruction. Not because people are necessarily malicious, but because information changes incentives. Once your plans are public, people can position around them, co-opt them, undermine them quietly, or simply move faster than you because they now know where you're going. The winner is always the person who knows something no one else does. Share strategically, not randomly, not never, to create dependency. This is the art of the secret report. Most people, when they have important information, transmit it, they report it, they forward it, and in doing that, they become a relay. Useful while the information is fresh, replaceable the moment it's been delivered. The operator who's building structural leverage does something different. They position themselves not as the messenger, but as the interpreter, the person through whom information must pass to be understood correctly. They shape context, they add significance. They become the person you need in the room, not because they hold data, but because they hold the frame. Cardinal Richelieu held more effective power than Louis XIII for much of the French king's reign, not through force, but through being the sole translator of political reality. The king understood the world through Richelieu's lens. That's not manipulation in the crude sense, it's information architecture, and it's extraordinarily durable. To build this in your own environment, you need to map the information flow first. Where does critical information originate? Who receives it first? Where does it slow down, get filtered, get reinterpreted before it reaches the people who act on it? And more importantly, where are the choke points? The places where controlling flow gives you structural influence over outcome. Find those choke points. Build your presence there, not loudly, not aggressively, just reliably, over time, until the flow of important information naturally passes through you. Stop. Look at your own office right now. Who is the person everyone checks with before a meeting starts? Not the boss, the gatekeeper. If you can't name that person in 10 seconds, you aren't the predator. You're the prey. Once you control information, you can control context. And once you control context, you control something most people never locate in time, who absorbs the failure when something goes wrong. Weapon 3. The Scapegoat Architecture. 1030. Your job is structural. Never be the subject. Something will always go wrong. That's not pessimism. It's operations. Every organization runs projects that underperform, makes bets that don't pay, rolls out initiatives that quietly collapse. The question isn't whether failure happens. The question is who carries it. Every court needs someone to absorb failure. Not because courts are cruel, but because courts are political. And failure requires a narrative, and narratives require an author and a subject. This is architecture, not malice. Someone will carry the weight of a failed initiative. The question is whether that outcome is random or deliberate, and whether you've positioned yourself on the right side of it before it resolves. Think of the company man you know. The one who stayed late for 10 years, never complained, and was let go with a generic email during the last merger. He followed the rules. He was the perfect worker. And he was the first one sacrificed because he had no shield. He didn't see the architecture until he was already inside it, facing the wrong direction. Don't be him. He was a victim of modern HR mists. Cesare Borgia would have viewed him as a tool to be used and discarded in a single afternoon. To understand why, you have to look at how Borgia handled his most effective servant. Machiavelli's most precise case study here is Cesare Borgia and Mirko de Orco. Borgia needed to impose hard order in the Romagna region. And he gave that task to Deorco, a man known for being brutal and effective. Deorco imposed the order. When that order had been established, Borgia had Deorco publicly removed, presenting himself as the deliverer of stability and justice, while Deorco absorbed every unit of resentment that the process had generated. Precise, contained, timed perfectly. The crowd didn't blame Borgia. They were relieved, because Borgia had understood something most operators miss. You can benefit from a difficult process without being personally associated with its costs, if you design the structure correctly before the process begins. Here's your red flag checklist. If you are currently on a project that has shifted its deadline 3 times, has no clear owner, and everyone is responsible, you are standing in the impact zone. You are the Deorco of this quarter. Here is how you step back before the blade falls. Stop accepting action items in writing. Move your name off the ownership line and onto the advisory line, and start letting your updates sound like observations rather than commitments. I've noticed the timeline is slipping. Lands differently than "I'll fix the timeline." Same awareness, different exposure. And next time you're asked to own a failing project, use this exact phrase. I'm happy to provide strategic oversight, but for the sake of speed, we should keep the direct accountability with the execution team. You've just moved yourself from the target to the observer in one sentence. The modern equivalent isn't finding someone to blame after a project fails. That's reactive and visible. The real move is identifying, before the failure happens, which project or process is likely to carry a loss, and positioning yourself adjacent to it without being attached to its outcome. What does that look like? You can be aware of a project, supportive of it in conversation, even helpful at specific moments, without being the person whose name is on the ownership line. You can be the advisor rather than the accountable party. You can be present at planning, absent at execution. The language of distance is a specific skill, phrases that create separation without visible disloyalty. I've been watching this closely, and I have some concerns about the approach, rather than "I'm not involved." My role here has been more consultative, rather than "this wasn't mine." Clean, professional, and structurally accurate, because you've already made sure it is. The ethical frame matters here. This isn't about pushing people into failure. It's about not engineering your own inclusion in failure that was already going to happen. You're not creating the problem. You're reading the terrain and making sure you're not standing in the impact zone when the ground shifts. Even the best positioned operator can't survive on positioning alone. At some point, you need people who'll move for you, and in a zero-sum environment, those people aren't found through friendship. Weapon 4. The Alliance Map 14.45. Because in a zero-sum game, no one survives alone. Friendship is a liability in a competitive environment. That sounds harsh until you understand the mechanics. A friend is maintained through emotion, through shared history, through mutual care, through the kind of bond that doesn't survive a direct conflict of interest. An ally is maintained through mutual interest, and mutual interest can be actively managed, reinforced, and calibrated. It doesn't depend on emotional consistency, which humans are notoriously bad at sustaining under pressure. It hurts to realize that the person you've been covering for 3 years wouldn't hesitate to take your office if it meant a 10% raise. But that pain is your awakening. Stop looking for friends in a war zone. Strategic civility is the weapon here. Not warmth, not manipulation, not performative networking with a firm handshake. Just a clear understanding of whose interests align with yours, what you can offer them, and what you need from them. Maintained professionally, over time. In any organization, power concentrates in 3 types of nodes. The gatekeeper controls access, information, meetings, the executive's calendar, the decision pipeline. The influencer shapes how key actors think about problems without necessarily holding formal authority. The executor can actually move things, can take a decision and make it real inside an organizational structure that eats decisions for breakfast. You don't need to own all 3. You need relationships with all 3. The Medici didn't maintain Florence through gold alone. They created systems of dependency, patronage networks that made artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli, scholars, bankers, and church figures better off inside the Medici system than outside it. And Machiavelli noted exactly how they did it. The Medici knew when to be the lion, applying direct force, and when to be the fox, using those patronage networks to make their enemies' own supporters dependent on Medici gold. The dependency wasn't oppressive. It was structural. People stayed not because they were forced to, but because the alternative was worse. That's the model for favor architecture. The favors you extend should be the kind that create obligation without creating resentment, which means they should feel like genuine help, and genuinely be genuine help, while also being the kind of help that the recipient remembers when you need them to move. The difference is timing. A favor given at the right moment, to the right person, when their need is real, is remembered permanently. A favor given as obvious transactional positioning is noticed, stored, and resented. The same action, different result, based entirely on whether it felt human or mechanical. The maintenance schedule matters too. Alliances decay without investment, not because people are disloyal, but because attention migrates. You don't need to be constantly present, which is exhausting and signals neediness. You need to be strategically present, showing up at the moments that count, contributing when it matters, being the person whose name surfaces naturally when an opportunity or problem is being discussed. That's the board you're building. Information channels, structural positioning, protected allies, and distance from absorbed failure. But even with the perfect map and the strongest allies, 90% of people still fail at the final door. They have the keys, but they refuse to turn the lock. Do you know why? Weapon 5. The Sovereign Mind, 19-0. This is where most people quit before the throne. The final barrier to real power isn't strategic, it's internal. Most people self-sabotage at the threshold of actual authority. They've built the board, they've made the moves. They're standing at the edge of a room where real decisions get made. And they flinch, not because they lack the skill, but because they still need approval. They still want to be liked by the people they're about to surpass. They still measure their worth by the validation of people below the level they're trying to reach. Machiavelli's final lesson on this is unambiguous. The prince must be willing to be hated by some to be respected by all. Not pursued, not earned, willing. The willingness itself is the thing, because real authority requires the ability to make choices that disappoint people, and doing that requires that your internal state not collapse when someone disapproves of you. The ruler doesn't care if he's liked, not arrogance, that's still externally defined, just inverted. This is something deeper. You judge your success by your results, not by whether people are smiling at you. You read feedback strategically, not emotionally. You update your approach based on results, not on whether someone seemed pleased with you. The approval-seeking patterns that undermine power are usually quiet. They show up as the extra explanation that wasn't necessary. The hedge at the end of a strong position. The email sent to check in when checking in signals anxiety. The small retreat from a decision when someone pushes back. Not because new information has emerged, but because disagreement is uncomfortable. Each of those patterns is a small withdrawal from a power account that doesn't refund easily. Surgically remove them. Not by performing coldness, that's still audience-dependent, but by developing a genuine, practiced indifference to approval that doesn't serve you. The cold truth about the people at the top of most organizations is this: they're not more talented than the people below them. They're not harder working, not more intelligent, not more creative. What separates them is something simpler. They stopped asking for permission. At some point, they internalized the right to occupy powerful spaces, make consequential decisions, and move forward without requiring someone's blessing first. Believing you belong at the top is the only way to get there. Everything before that belief is preparation. Everything after it is execution. Close the loop on where we started. You were told the ladder is about talent. It isn't. It's about power, and power is a system with learnable architecture. The court never disappeared. It just changed addresses. The information asymmetries, the alliance networks, the strategic positioning, the sovereign psychology, it's all there, running underneath the performance reviews and the org charts, and it's been running the whole time. The board was always there. You just needed to see it. That's the single takeaway. Not a trick, not a hack, a perceptual shift. Once you stop looking at the stated system and start looking at the actual system, every environment becomes readable. The moves become visible. The leverage points reveal themselves. The elite keep these rules to themselves for a reason. If you want to continue accessing Machiavellian strategy and these hidden weapons, you know where to find me. And here's the final provocation. Most people who watch this will nod. They'll find it sharp. They'll agree with the logic. They'll share the most quotable line. And then they'll go right back into the office tomorrow and perform competence for an audience that isn't grading on that rubric. The game isn't about being smart enough to understand this. It's about being disciplined enough to actually play it. That part, nobody can hand you.